Hello and welcome everyone to yet another Edelweiss Connect program. Indian economy is at a very interesting phase today, where it is getting ready to take a higher and a longer leap into growth orbit after going through a very and one of the most challenging years in many decades. To take this leap, how are the macros and micros of our economy shaping up? How are they placed? How is the global environment and what it means for India and its growth story? Let us learn about all this and what is the turning point, whether it is a turning point in India's economy with Sahil Kapoor today. He is our man to go when it comes to macros and economy at Edelweiss. He is the chief market strategist at Edelweiss Wealth Management. So, welcome, Sahil. What we'll do is I'll first request Sahil to talk about his view on the market, share his thoughts on how the economy is shaping up, and then we'll have a short Q&A session with him to understand it in more detail. So over to you, Sahil.
Thank you, Niranjan, for that intro, and thank you for having me here. So, I'll probably start off with a few data points and probably try and bring a narrative here, which is very important. The question that you asked is that are we at a turning point? What are the macros saying? What are the numbers saying? And I'll put forth some numbers, some ideas, and then we'll probably chat about them. So, let me start off with something interesting. Right now, the best comment globally or the question both is about liquidity. How much liquidity is there in the system? Everybody speaks about the central banks have been very benevolent, very benign. They've been giving markets excess liquidity, not only in India but globally. Started off with Fed and European Central Bank and RBI. All of them have been extremely easy in terms of monetary policy, which has created a lot of liquidity. And that is something that we hear often. Uh, so if you look at the structure, domestically, India never had so much liquidity. We've been generally a liquidity deficit nation in terms of banking. Over a period of time, not only banking, I think overall also in India after the global financial crisis of 2008 and after the huge inflation spurt uh, in the early part of the last decade from 2012 onwards, we've been kind of scared of inflation, scared of having a very high liquidity surplus or easy monetary policy. That hasn't really played out well for us. So since then, we've been doing deficits on our interbank markets. If you look at the chart on the screens here, if you look at the chart on your left, it tells you the liquidity scenario in India, right? If you look at this whole period from 2011 to 2018, you see this period India has been in a liquidity deficit ever since, interbank liquidity, and that actually had an artificial surplus in sort of a V shape. If you see, uh, when we had demonetization, it's a very important point here because of two things. First is, I think many would have heard this word again, demonetization, after many years. Mind you, in 2021, it will be about 5 years since we had demonetization. And when I recollect, on November 8th, when it happened, I was catching a flight which was flying at 8 p.m. And that was when this announcement was made, roughly around that time. And nobody knew what will be the impact. And eventually we lived through it. There were a lot of changes in the economy, how economy shaped up. Markets had, sort of a mini heart attack for a few days, and then it came back quite vigorously. So one thing is that things come back to normalcy. Even I'm sure that after 5 years, when we look back at 2020, we'll have some lessons which will, probably be positive than negative, and that's about, that's how markets are. So if you look at this particular moment in India's history, particularly in terms of liquidity, we had a big liquidity surplus because banks were inundated with cash at that point in time. It was an artificial one. But if you look at what happened in, let's say, July 2019, is or probably a little earlier than that, is that India began to, at this moment, India began to think about having more liquidity in the system. And I think that is where things have changed. Things have changed quite dramatically. From July 2019, we've been having continuous liquidity surplus. And I think it accelerated quite significantly once COVID hit. So right now, over, let's say, what has changed? Maybe it began pre-COVID. It's not a phenomena which has changed now. It began pre-COVID, as I said, and it is continuing. We have a surplus, and I reckon that this surplus is going to continue in the future. I don't think that liquidity is going away because it's a structural change in how the central bank is approaching monetary policy. Secondly, I think from a short term perspective, what we are saying is that credit is not growing. Incremental credit, if you look at this number, this is the amount of new rupee loans given by banks in a particular financial year, right? So if you look at these numbers, they were hovering at around 4 lakh crores. When in the noughties, they went up significantly. From '03 to '06 to '07, it had a stupendous growth, and then it flatlined after the GFC, and then it jumped again because, if you remember, the government pushed credit into the system to revive the economy, and this also resulted in a twin balance sheet problem, which is his part of history, which probably will not touch right now. But I think over the last 10 years, if you see roughly on an average, the new rupee loans created every year has been stagnant. They are not going up, right? And this creates a bit of a problem. If you look at India's overall GDP, it's at about 200 lakh crores. Okay, and what it does is, when you look at the total credit in the system, which is about, or the total debt in the system is about 123% of GDP, right? So roughly in terms of the quantum, if you look at the total number, uh, against 200 lakh crores or 200 lakh crore, you have about 246 or 250 lakh crores of incremental credit or debt. Uh, every year, if you want to, let's say, grow by 10%, so you want to increase your GDP by 10%, 200 lakh crores to 220 lakh crores, which is a nominal GDP number, you need credit in excess of 1.5 times. To create 20 lakh crores of GDP, roughly you require 35 lakh crores of credit. We haven't done that, and that's been a problem for us for a long period of time now. You could probably say for almost a decade now, right? And that is something which has probably not played out positively. And one factor which has been responsible, it is not responsible for everything, but one factor which has been responsible is very tight liquidity conditions. Okay, that I think is now going away structurally. I don't think it's a short term change. This is probably going to remain for a while. That also I'll talk about why. This number most likely will start turning in FY22 because things are probably becoming more normal now. That means incremental credit offtake, demand for credit, and the lending numbers, both from banks and non-banks, are going to improve going forward. So, point number one today, uh, easy money conditions or more liquidity. We have that condition right now, and probably it is going to continue in the foreseeable future. By foreseeable future, I mean FY22 most likely, and probably a spillover in the next year. Secondly, the other leg of the other leg of the overall system, which is the government expenditure. Fiscal counter cyclical approach. Okay, what has happened is, over the years, let's say, as I'll go back to FY12-13, we had twin deficits on our CAD and on our BOP, uh, and our fiscal deficit. Both were ballooning. At that point, we experienced a lot of pain in the system, and then we realized that we'll have to have a glide path. We will have a fiscal deficit at about 3.5% of GDP and slide it to 3% of GDP roughly, according to the FRBM. So we try to stick to that number for years. Okay, you see that we've been trying to do that. And 3% is some sort of a theoretical magical number spoken about, in various forum. Maastricht Treaty spoke about this for the first time, but there is no real world sanctity of that number. It is just a concept which has been around for a very long time. So we tried to achieve that number over a period of time. And in doing so, what we did is we kept our fiscal policy very tight. Okay. So extra government expenditure, which probably is very, very important when the economy is recovering from a shock like 2008 and a twin shock like FY12 and 13. If you remember the rupee fall and double digit inflation that we had, you require government support for economy to recover. You had an investment winter where investments were not happening. So in totality, if you go back to slide 1 and if you talk about this number, there were two problems. One, very tight liquidity conditions, and second, a fiscal policy which was too tight. It was tight that it was not helping the economy to a very large extent. Uh, to some extent, you could say that prudence acted like imprudence. It's very, very easy to say that in hindsight. In reality, things are very different. But in hindsight, it is quite clear that did not help us. Secondly, our development expenditure, if you look at very, very carefully, it grew quite sharply. This is not a log scale, it's a linear scale, so you will not be able to see the changes quite well. But roughly from FY11, 12, 13, 14, 15, the growth was slower. It has started to pick up for the last 2 years. And this year is mostly a aberration because the budget numbers were much higher. But FY20 again saw a large dip, right? Because you had to do a lot of revenue expenditure rather than capital expenditure to rescue the economy. So in totality, if you look at last 5 to 7 years, the profile of our expenditure from what the government was spending money on was not very development oriented. It was more short term in nature, more focused towards consumption. It has its own fair share of reasons, but this is what has happened. So now what we have is a double support. Okay, first is we have a monetary policy which is loose and supportive. Secondly, we have a fiscal policy which right now is probably pro-cyclical. I have written here counter-cyclical approach, but right now we are in a recovery cycle, and the policy is trying to support it, okay, rather than blunt it. So, which is probably the right thing to do right now. And this is, I think, the biggest change over the last 5 to 7 years. And probably once you go ahead, if you look at the next few years, this is going to be something very, very important. Over the next 3 to 5 years, we are going to have this combination, which was in reverse over the last 5 to 7 years, and probably only one legged in the previous decade. Okay. But now we'll have a combination which is working on both these legs. So I think this is the turning point, and probably this will be quite beneficial. How is it beneficial in numbers? I'll give out two numbers. If you look at the total GDP, which is about 200 lakh crores for India right now, government spends about 34 lakh crores out of it. Private listed universe does about 100 lakh crores of top line. So that is the GDP contribution that comes from there. So this is about 135 roughly. The rest of it is unlisted space, MSME, other businesses. The biggest delta that you get from 35 lakh crores is what the government expenditure does. That if that number grows strongly, it provides that much amount of stimulus. Government can't do everything, but it can take that number higher. So that number is very important. So that number is now growing at a healthy pace with a good mix. Okay. As I said, government is now going in for higher development expenditure, which it did not do earlier. Now it is going. So that 35 lakh crores is doing a good job now. The rest of it, the listed universe, let's say 100 lakh crores of top line, that hasn't grown for last 2-3 years. Okay. FY22, it will grow because of base, of course. Secondly, I think because of lower interest rates, because of higher liquidity, and because the government is trying to crowd in the private sector, the growth will accelerate even for the listed and unlisted space. So that eventually that will help the economy recover. Our nominal numbers will look better, and probably our growth rates, which were very dismal even before COVID, they will recover. Okay, so that I think probably you could say is a could turn out to be a second innings for the India story, which has been in a deep freeze over the last 5 to 7 years. Uh, Let me highlight a few points which will be very important in terms of data. First is what has happened recently. Okay, so first 2 points I gave you on liquidity, on how government expenditure is going to happen and probably help the private sector. Uh, but why is interest rate probably and the liquidity scenario going to remain benign? I think that is something which is important. First is uh, our earnings hasn't really grown. If you look at, let's say, the headline number for Nifty, apart from 22 estimate, you see we don't have very large buildings here on this chart, right? It's been stagnant. So if I remember correctly from my memory, I think 2014 was the first time when I think Nifty was hitting about 9,200 levels, and erstwhile Governor Raghuram Rajan, I think, had cut interest rates. At that point, on in that quarter, Nifty did an EPS of 413. Okay, 413, or 12-month trailing EPS in that quarter, and I think that was the same number that we did, I think, in Q3 of FY20. So that is a kind of trend that we had in terms of earnings on large caps. Of course, this trend has now been broken, right? And how this trend has broken? First, I think we had a tremendous amount of cost savings in FY21 because of COVID, of course. Secondly, I think businesses recovered at a much faster pace than what was expected. Largely the listed universe was helped by a huge amount of market share gains, because unlisted businesses, or let's say not unlisted but unorganized businesses, were not able to cope up at a faster rate than the formal businesses or the organized players, and they took away market share, and that is represented in what happened with the listed universe, right? So that is something which helped the earnings recovery and the markets recovery. And second and more important point is of course the liquidity. Okay, so first point, our earnings were not improving at a very fast pace. They have started to improve now. That gives a very, very large, let's say, an automatic stimulus to the economy. Why? I will tell you. There are only two parts of the economy which can provide automatic fillip. Okay, first is the government adopting counter-cyclical policies. It comes and spends money when private sector is unable to. We call it fiscal stimulus also, right? The second way is that the private sector starts spending and probably investing. Both these things cause eventually one single thing to move, which is the wages and salaries in the economy. Okay, Indian wages and salaries bill, if you look at the BSE 500 data over the last 5 to 7 years, it has probably slowed down considerably. I remember in the last decade, that is from 2000 to 2010, in the best of times, the wages and salaries bill, the YOY growth was actually approaching double digits, high single digits. And over the last 5 to 7 years, the growth has been about 4.5% pre-COVID. Post-COVID, the number is even slower. Now, what happens is that once corporate profitability comes back because of a few reasons, one of that reason is corporate tax cut. Another reason is low interest rates, which directly adds to bottom line. We had a huge debt deleveraging cycle going on. Third is accelerating top line, which I spoke just previously. What these three things will do, it will cause the wages and salaries number to go up. So once that happens, two legs will start working. One, higher government expenditure. Second, higher private expenditure or investment, both. And that is something which causes a virtuous cycle in the economy to kickstart. In terms of liquidity, why I said it is probably going to stay. First point is our real rates are still about zero. This might come as a surprise because it does appear that our real rates are extremely negative because inflation is very high, and uh, you know interest rates are much lower. Repo is only at 4%, but inflation is at 6% for the last 3 months. It has just started falling at 4.1, the latest reading. But if you look carefully, before FY13, India used to use only WPI as a matrix, which is the wholesale price index, to create its monetary policy. We did not change our structure nor the way that we did business, but we shifted our base from WPI to CPI. And our real rates were made positive on top of CPI. So let's say if our WPI on an average used to be about 4%, CPI used to be about 6%, and we moved from a WPI enabled 50 basis point real rate. We had a window of about 50 basis points to a CPI based real rate, which had a window of 125 basis points. So in reality, we increased our real rates by 200, 250 basis points after FY13. And I think that reflected in very tight liquidity, that reflected in very high real rates, which depressed the whole cycle. I think that is now out of the window. It went away from July 2019, and I think that change is going to continue. Secondly, because of what has happened globally, which is my next slide, it has given a bigger room for, let's say, the government of India and for the Reserve Bank of India to enact that easy path, that path of easy liquidity and more availability of funds, which is, I think, something which is going to be beneficial for us. So if you look at this slide, there was a 40 to 50% growth in central bank balance sheet. Now it is going to be about 10%, but in roughly this huge liquidity. So if you look at the numbers, the global GDP or the GDP of the world, as you say, will be about $80 trillion, roughly about 76 to $80 trillion, which quarter you look at because of COVID. The stimulus enacted by various central banks is approaching $26 trillion. Okay. Which is, about 33% of global GDP. This is unprecedented, bigger than it happened in World War II. Okay. And this probably will continue in totality. This whole number is not going to shrink back to what it was earlier. It is not going to go back to 20 trillion. That will happen over a very long time, and that too as a percentage of GDP. So this stimulus is not going to go away in a hurry. It will remain in the system for a very long time. Secondly, India's monetary stimulus has been sizable, although our fiscal stimulus has been lower, but monetary stimulus has been sizable. So point number one, which I spoke earlier, liquidity is here to stay. Second point was, how are we placed in the fiscal cycle? So India did not give a very large fiscal stimulus in the first place. If you see, all the packages which were announced for 20 lakh crores and others, in reality, the fiscal outgo was much lower. Now what the government is doing, it is exercising something which is pro-cyclical. When the recovery is happening, they are saying, let's accelerate that recovery. In the recent budget, what the government has announced is that what it will do is it will spend more money. Okay, earlier we had a fiscal deficit target of 3% of GDP, but now the government is saying that by FY24-25, they are going to go to 4.5% of GDP, 4.6% of GDP as fiscal deficit. That means over the next 3-4 years, they're going to spend about, as per our calculations, they're going to spend about $14 trillion extra. Okay, and which is a lot of money. Okay, and that adds about 3% of GDP, according to our calculations, over the next few years in terms of growth. So if you put two and two together, higher government expenditure, better private sector, where it is probably going to have a lot more in terms of buoyancy of revenues, which will probably come to bottom line, and plus the liquidity, which is going to help in terms of lower interest rates. Third, if you look at after 2020, India also enters a very sweet spot in terms of demographics. We are young, one of the youngest nations in the world. And mind you, there is a huge outcry about global inflation right now. But when you look at the global demographics, country by country, there are very few countries where demographics are actually inflationary. By inflation, I mean the growth supportive. There are very few countries, and India is probably one of them. For rest of the world, for example, when you talk about that there will be huge inflation in US, there are not many drivers to drive inflation. The more bigger or stronger drivers in US are deflationary. The demographics, the amount of debt, the overcapacity that they can create, technological disruptions, competitive intensity, all of them are deflationary. But when you come to India, most of these levers are inflationary or growth oriented, which is, I think, probably going to play out over the next 10 years. Uh, Second important or fourth important point is the consumption which lies ahead of us. I think it's a point which is already well made. A lot of you already understand it. We are changing complexion. India has probably one of the highest online population in the world. Numbers are rising at a fast pace, and because of COVID, I think the disruption is even sharper. So probably this trend will continue. This trend will be visible in numbers. Even when you look at, let's say, our complexion of how India is growing over the last 5-7 years, our industry hasn't really fared well. Manufacturing and mining industry, they have been very, very lethargic. But when you look at our consumption, our services, they have done really well. And I think that trend is going to continue. And probably manufacturing and mining is going to make a comeback and provide more fillip to the economy. So we have a huge room ahead of us. This is one example in terms of online. Every sector, if you look at, so this particular example talks about that our user growth will be roughly 4 times the global rate of 3% in what is the ongoing period. And there are huge amount of drivers for this happening. And when you pick up sector, for example, if you pick up home building, you pick up pharma, you pick up healthcare, you pick up technological adaptation. Each of these sectors has huge runway in India. So, for example, it is often spoken that India has a very limited set of consumers. Okay, because large swathes of countries still poor. We don't even make up the poverty line. That the consumption patterns or the numbers that generally market participants and particularly economists show, they can never be met. But India has 100 million affluent class or middle class, which is probably bigger than the population of many countries, right? So even that particular 10 crore log jo hain, even that 10 crore people can drive consumption at a very, very fast pace, and they are driving it. Similarly, like World's Pharmacy, India has been top. It has broken into top 10, over 5.7 crore doses given in 53 countries. So which tells you in terms of the vaccination drive that we are having right now, that it tells you that even India is now clearly ahead of the game in terms of sectorally breaking into the top echelons in the world. So this will probably continue and present as an opportunity in terms of how growth will shape up. Also, another driver which is probably shifting in stealth over the last few years is how Indian economy is now becoming more formal. For example, yesterday I read that the FASTag adoption is now 100%. All the tolls in India are now on FASTag. The other day, I read that India's wages in terms of Manrega, the leakages or the delay in paying Manrega wages has fallen from 63% to 2% over a 5-year period. That is the kind of efficiency that we are building. And you can see this in many, many sectors. It's a very, very slow and gradual change. It doesn't pop up on a daily basis. It is almost irrelevant on a monthly basis. But over a 5 or a 10-year period, it becomes absolutely essential, and it becomes a very, very powerful force. And I think that is happening over a period of time by adopting various methods which we have devised over the last 20 years. And I think that is showing up in numbers now, and probably in the next 5 to 10 years, this will become a snowball. It will probably help us in a lot of ways. Talking just the last point in terms of very, very short term, most of the trends that we are seeing is now indicating that Indian economy is normalizing. Why I don't use the word accelerating? Because it is not yet. The numbers have just normalized, gone back to pre-COVID levels for many sectors, although there are a lot of sectors which are still to catch up. Particularly if you look at this chart on your screen, retail and recreation is yet to do, catch up. Workplaces is yet to catch up in terms of mobility. But a lot of signs that things are coming back to normalcy in residential areas, supermarkets and pharmacies. Mobility trends are back. IIP, PMI, all of them have started to come back. You could see a plethora of indicators I've put in here, which have come back to pre-COVID levels and probably started growing also. So this trend will probably continue. And FY22, I think, will be a year where we come back to normalcy and come back to a state where it's like a springboard where the growth can accelerate in the years going ahead. And largely, I think from a market's perspective, two things are very clear. First is that the amount of global stimulus that we have in the system is going to be very, very effective, and it is not going away very easily. It's double-legged, okay, which I just spoke earlier. And secondly, when you have so much stimulus in the system, particularly from a global trade point of view, because things become normal, there is more trade globally happening. You would have seen what is happening with Baltic Dry Index and the pent-up demand which is going on right now. Once demand recovers globally, what will happen is global trade will flourish. Okay, and that is something which is very beneficial for emerging markets. And I think India being a front runner in emerging markets, it will also benefit. So in that sense, I think over the next 3 to 5 years, things look up for us. And probably COVID was a turning point. And I think we are having a lot of ammunition to use this turning point to our advantage going ahead. And I think I'll probably stop here, and we have a few more slides which we'll discuss in Q&A. So this is it from my end.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sahil, for those interesting slides. I have a couple of questions, and we have many questions from the audience as well. One important question is you pointed out in your presentation that there is some room for productive capital allocation. Also, in the recent budget, spending on capital or capital expenditure saw a good rise. Now, one important question is when or will this be enough to kickstart the investment cycle in the economy? Over the last few years, the investment side of the GDP has not done really well. And with reforms like PLI and all, so what is your view? Will this be helpful? What else we need?
So I think for investment cycle to kickstart, there are two very, very important levers. First is that you need to have your industry running at near full capacity, okay, which requires a sort of a demand which can bring that capacity up. Okay, we've been lacking that number for a while. Okay, as I explained earlier, why we lack that number. The government was not spending enough money. It was probably trying to hit a target which was non-existent, or even when it was spending, it was spent on places where it did not give the bang for the buck. Okay, and secondly, the private sector was deleveraging. Wages and salaries were degrowing. Globally, inflation cycle had turned into disinflation. All the three levers, I think, have turned. Okay, globally, I think we've seen some amount of bottoming out in terms of commodity prices for a sustainable period of time. So that cycle is favorable. Secondly, as you said in the budget, the government has shown intent. Okay, it has come clean in terms of reporting numbers, which is I think something which I haven't seen over the last maybe 15 years in terms of the reporting structure that we've seen, which is very, very important. Secondly, it promises to spend a lot of money on capital expenditure, which is resourceful, which creates a larger bang for the buck. And India, as you know, is a country where there are a lot of turnkey projects, a lot of projects which can be quickly implemented. Quickly, I mean by in the next 6 to 8 quarters or 12 quarters, which can provide a lot of support to the economy. Right. So if you build a road, if you build a house, these are the things which provide a huge amount of fillip to the economy rather than just spending money on revenue expenditure, on wages and salaries. So these levers, I think, provide you some inclination that over the next few years, there is a possibility that you will have some revival in investment cycle. I won't say that it will be spread across sectors. I think it will be more sector specific, but I think things will be much better 5 years from now than they were 5 years in the last 5 years.
Right, right. That's true. On the interest rate cycle, you did mention that there could be a pause from RBI, but given the inflation numbers which are coming down, the amount of liquidity which is there, uh, uh, what do you think over the next 1 to 2 years? Will interest rate cycle reverse, or given the where economy is and how much time it will take to come over the last 1 year loss, do you think the pause
Yeah.
will be extended in 1 to 2 years? What do you feel about the interest rate cycle?
I think probably RBI will be more accommodative in nature. So there are two things. First is that we need that kind of liquidity support to get our banking credit off the hook. Okay. Secondly, I think there is about 200, 250 basis points of inherent cost of debt or cost of capital, which is built into the system because of the NPA problem.
Right.
Okay. Because until we account for that, that will not go away.
Okay.
Thirdly, even in FY22, government has to borrow. It is going to borrow about 9.7 lakh crores in net credit, net borrowing, and gross borrowing of about 12 lakh crores. So RBI has to play a supporting role to let the government borrowing go out smoothly. So I think even in FY22, it will probably be more accommodative. Secondly, I think inflation from a headline perspective will remain digestible. Happen if a taper tantrum were to reoccur. I think we are extremely well placed now. Our current account deficit is actually going to be a surplus this year. Fiscal deficit is wider, but the quality of deficit is much stronger because the expenditure is going towards fixed asset creation. Secondly, we have almost $600 billion of FX reserves. So we are now net creditor nation. The amount of FX that we have, and if you subtract the amount of loans that we have to repay, we are actually in surplus now. So that gives us a lot of stability from outside forces in terms of FX stability. Internally, I think the government revenues are going to recover and likely to provide automatic stabilizers. So if you put both these together, I think India is probably in one of the best shapes across emerging markets to weather any storm of taper tantrum.
Right, right, right. That's true. That's true. One interesting, views which you have shared in recent past is on the gold, and which also has a very strong correlation or a view which you may have on the dollar. So, can you just
Yeah.
brief us on that, because that's a very interesting space for a lot of people.
So last year in April, we wrote a report saying that the mountain of liquidity that the Fed is introducing will probably cause a huge dollar depreciation, and it did play out. Although in the short term, we feel that some amount of rebound in dollar is quite possible, but eventually we think that the uh, trend for dollar is either sideways or down. Either it remains hinged to a particular level, or it depreciates even more, largely driven by the mountain of liquidity that the US has created. So it will probably remain soft. Secondly, particularly on gold, which obviously benefits from a weaker dollar, there is a financial debasement which has happened not only in US but globally. Okay, the amount of money printing which has happened not only in US, in Eurozone, in Japan, in China. You will be interested to know that Chinese M2 is actually 3 times bigger than US. It's a very, very large number. So that 2 times bigger, I'm sorry, which creates a different kind of an animal.
And Sahil, one very frequently asked question these days. We have got many questions today on that aspect, and we can't leave you answering without answering. That is on the valuation, right? So
Yes.
a lot of hope and has been built up in the valuation today. How do you see that?
Sure. So I think markets have discounted next 2 to 3 years of earnings, and particularly, let me tell you a data point which is very important. after 2008, the global financial crisis, actually S&P 500 bottomed at a price to earnings multiple of 126, if I remember correctly, because the trailing earnings just vanished, and the PE appeared very, very large. So there is a possibility that we are in a similar scenario, that PE looks so large because your trailing earnings are gone completely. But secondly, I think there are two important things to watch. First is that a large part of profitability created in FY21 comes from cost cutting. Okay. That boosts the bottom line significantly. Numbers appear very, very large. But part of that will not be able to continue. Part of that will come back in terms of employee cost, in terms of fixed asset cost, operation cost. Many of those costs will come back, but not all. Okay, so that will get added to profitability. Secondly, lower interest rates, which are lower than they were earlier, they will also continue. So it directly goes and sits into your long-term valuation. So both these factors are beneficial. So from a, let's say, trend point of view, higher valuations is a trend. It will continue until and unless we see the rate cycle going down. So you could probably imagine a big X where valuations are going up and the rate cycle is going down. So over a 5-year period, that will continue. But real life is not straight line. It goes up and down. So I think let's say in the next 2-3 quarters, what markets could probably do, and probably it requires, is a large consolidation where earnings play a catch up, valuations come down a bit, macro data begins to improve a lot. Numbers start appearing very, very solid. And this convergence will probably give you more confidence that the growth that is ahead of us is probably going to be more sustained. So at this point, valuations appear to be a risk that you should red flag in your hypothesis. But I think, again, once valuations correct, you see a correction, it offers an opportunity which probably is much more structural than it was, let's say, 2 years ago. So you could pick and choose. You could probably wait if you have the appetite for that, or you could probably see volatility through and let the longer term trend play out.
Right. That's an interesting play which one can have. So Sahil, thank you for all those answers. I think so we have many questions, but due to paucity of time, what we'll do is we'll move to our last section, which is rapid fire questions to you.
Sure.
Simple questions. Don't be try to answer them in your own way. So the first one is, if you were to invest today, how would your allocation be between equity, debt, gold, or any other asset class?
So the allocation that I am speaking about right now is about 50% equity and about 40% debt, mix of debt and cash. I am a guy who keeps 20% cash always across cycles, but that may not be a strategy for a lot of people. Right. So roughly debt and cash will be about 40 and 10 will go to gold. Earlier it was 5, but as I said, gold goes to 1750. I want to up it to 10%. That should be the ideal strategy right now.
Right. Fantastic. One thing which you would like to add to the budget announcements which were already done?
I think this was a good one. I don't want to add anything to it, but maybe a slight change could be to increase the revenue expenditure. It was kept a little low. Maybe you could add about 7 to 8% there. It would have been a blockbuster. So probably it's a hit film this time. It could have been a blockbuster in that sense.
Fantastic. So, I mean, you are true to what you have mentioned on your slide, where you gave 8 out of 10 to the budget.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. If you were a Fed chairman, what would you do next?
Nothing. I think I will just probably not do anything. This is the best time to not do anything and let the recovery play out. And I think that is what the Fed is also doing. But I'll also keep vigil in terms of the excesses which are building up in the system. So both these things, probably look at margin debt more closely, rampant speculation in different asset class. If I have the mandate, we'll probably check that out. Otherwise, it's time to do nothing.
Right. One interesting market where you would invest outside India?
Outside India, I think probably 2 markets. One is, of course, Eurozone. I think it has been depressed for a very long time. Purely as a valuation catch-up, I think it could play out. If you want to go more deeper, I think I'll probably be a little more inclined toward Italy because Mario Draghi has come back there. It offers great hope. I think last 10 years have been terrible. So you could really get some bargains there. And second, of course, is Asia itself. X of India. I think it's the story. Demographic, consumers, everything is going to move here. It is already moving. Last 10, 15 years already shown. And I think the best place to see that is probably go back and watch Hans Rosling's video on how demographics and health is changing. It will kill all doubts where you should invest. So X of India, I think it is still Asia.
Right. And one last question, and which we cannot afford to not ask on this session, is about Bitcoin. One line on Bitcoin.
Yeah. I'm not an expert on Bitcoin. But I think right now, I think it's testing waters. I think the technology is something which is useful, the blockchain technology, but whether it sails through the storm of regulations, I think it is very tough to say. I don't see governments giving up their control on currency. And there is also an aspect where Bitcoin is being talked about as something of a rebellion against the current financial system. But when you go back and see who's invested in that, it is the same investor base which has benefited from this financial system. So I don't see how it is different. So these two things will reconcile over a period of time. Maybe I traded Bitcoin once it was allowed earlier, but I don't have any particular view on it now.
Right. So thank you so much, Sahil, for all those wisdom shared. Very, very interesting points discussed today. Thank you all for participating as always. We would like to end the session here today. Have a great day. Have a safe weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.